Hi, and welcome to the Davos in the Desert podcast series. These podcasts feature thought leaders in business and public policy and are meant to be informative and thought-provoking. You will be hard-pressed to find a more insightful program on valuing dental practices. This session covers everything related to dental practices, from the cyclicality and seasonality to regulatory framework, from revenue breakdowns, recurring, non-recurring, elective, critical, to payer sources, private pay, insurance, financing, care credit, Medicare. From investments in dental equipment to investments in marketing, and from retention rates to utilization rates. James Kelly sheds light on succession planning, the impact of goodwill and ability to attract labor. This podcast provides important insights into the process of selling dental practices, as well as a variety of valuation methodologies. Statistics related to payroll costs, real estate costs, and dentist annual income are provided. Without further ado, here is David Waintick, Davos in the Desert CEO and our podcast host.
So, James Kelly, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so we're looking forward to learning more about valuing dental practices. So maybe we can start off with some macro economic questions. So to what extent are dental practices cyclical or seasonal?
I think most of it is going to be based on when insurance companies reset, when your insurance resets. So there's going to be some cyclical or seasonal business depending on when your limits reset for the year. So a lot of insurance is reset at the end of the year. A lot of insurance is reset at their renewal date. So it's really going to depend. But there is a bit of seasonality, a bit of cyclical activity for dental practices in certain areas that they can use, one as a way to draw customers in. It's a good marketing technique to let people know that their benefits are about to reset and their annual limits are going to reset. So to try to take advantage of that and use the remainder of their annual limit. Most dental practice or dental plans have $1,200 limits or depending on the limit, depending on the plan, that they have to use up, and it doesn't carry over to the following year.
Okay, so maybe a surge of revenue in the beginning of the year and the end of the year.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And I guess, some of the procedures are somewhat elective or, able to be skipped, when the economic times are very bad, jobs and so forth. So I guess there's some degree of seasonality.
Yeah, and I mean, economics wise, it's going to depend on their location and their customer base on what kind of services they typically provide in the first place. A lot of dentists don't provide, they concentrate maybe on more preventative or hygiene type services rather than aesthetic type services like, say, orthodontics or caps or things of that nature.
Okay. Maybe in general, I know that varies from practice to practice, but what kinds of blends of payers are you seeing? How much is private pay versus?
Yeah, so insurance in dental, unlike in normal medical, is a little bit different. It's a lot lower on the limits. It's a lot lower on what they actually provide. So as an example, a crown at a dental practice may run $1,500-$1,600, and the insurance may cover, say, $900 of that. And again, it depends on your limits. So they may only cover $900 of that once a year. So if you had to have 2 crowns, it's going to be more out of pocket. So I think the most of the money that comes in for dental practices is going to be from direct pay. You're going to definitely have insurance. You're going to definitely have a lot of payments coming in from insurance, but direct pay for a client that maybe has more stuff that they have to get done for the year is going to be more common. Otherwise, it's going to be the normal insurance and reimbursements.
And does Medicare or Medicaid, do they cover dental?
Medicaid covers some dental, and that's going to depend on your state. Medicare, it's going to depend, and I apologize. A lot of these questions are going to be, it depends. It depends on your, say, Medicare Advantage plan, base Medicare. It depends on a lot of things. Medicaid is going to definitely depend on your state. So California is going to be different than Arizona, and they're going to cover different amounts. Now, they don't typically cover a lot. Medicaid is notorious for underpaying or low paying their claims. And dentists are not necessarily required to take Medicaid. Much like in the healthcare industry, nobody's required to take Medicaid.
Do you see dentists, in general, I know it depends, but in general, are dental practices trying to provide more aesthetic treatment, teeth whitening procedures and that kind of thing, or is that kind of bad?
Yeah. So it's a good strategy for a dentist to not only do, you can't control the one-off ones, right? You can't control someone that comes in with a cracked tooth or someone that has to get a root canal. What you can control is hygiene and things like teeth whitening and cleanings. So what I would encourage any dentist office to do, if not even if they're just looking to sell, but just to have a healthier practice, is to start concentrating specifically on not only retaining new clients that come in for a crown to continue to do other preventative services, but to have that as their main revenue driver, because that's the one thing they can control. Someone is going to come in an emergency because they need a crown or they've cracked a tooth or something like that. You're not going to be able to control much of getting those clients. They're going to come maybe because it's convenient, or you were close, or they've heard of you, or something to that nature. But if you're talking about recurring services, that's where your main revenue is going to be. And that's also going to be where you can pick up those types of clients. If someone suddenly needs a crown, they're going to go to the dentist they're familiar with, as opposed to going to a first-time dentist. I mean, dentistry, people are scared of the dentist a lot of times, right? There's a little bit of anxiety in going to a dentist. There's a little bit of anxiety going to a new dentist. So if you can retain them with hygiene and with other reoccurring services, that's going to be your best bet, because that's going to be what you can control the most.
As far as regulations, it seems like there's a lot of specialists in the dental field. Is it easy for them to offer new services, or every time a dentist wants to offer new services? So, for example, if a dentist thinks that there's a good opportunity in treating gums, do they need to get another certification, pass other regulatory exams or what have you, or can they just start offering adjacent services to what they normally offer?
From what I understand, any general dentist can offer pretty much any services that they want. Whether someone is okay with not going to a specialist is kind of up for grabs, and there are certainly more opportunities if you get those specific titles and certifications. So, for to do periodontist work, which is gum disease, you might want to actually get a periodontist on your staff, because that's something you can do too. Even if you own the dental practice and maybe you're not a periodontist, or you don't do orthodontics, you can hire a contract out with a doctor that does do that. There's plenty of practices that don't have those people on staff, but they contract out with a specific one, so they don't have to send that business necessarily out the door. Or you can even have periodontists that travel, right? That come to your office once a week, twice a week, and that's when you make all the appointments for them, and you have some sort of a reciprocal deal with the fees.
Mm-hmm. I would imagine another limiting factor is the availability of the devices. I think one time I had a root canal, needed a root canal, and my dentist didn't have the equipment needed to do it well. And so, by default, he had to send me to somebody else.
Right. Or for that matter, they may just not be comfortable with doing that kind of dentistry. I mean, it's specialized work, and they may be more comfortable with doing general dentistry, or they may be having another concentration. I mean, an orthodontics specialist, for example, is probably not going to want to do a crown or a root canal.
For a dentist that lives like on a border with another state, they would have to be regulated by that second state to offer services in that other state, right?
Right. In the other state, you can have patients come to you from anywhere though. So if you were bordering, if you were in Yuma in Arizona, for example, someone from El Centro could very easily travel to your practice and come to your practice, and you would have to change any of your regulations. If you wanted to open an office in El Centro as well as Yuma, then you're going to have to be following rules for California and Arizona. Now, those rules, I mean, dental rules is it's HIPAA, first of all. Licensure is by the state, and there's a lot of reciprocal license rules, very similar to a CPA license, actually. It's like if I'm on a CPA in Arizona, the rules allow me to also practice in California because it's the same exam. So it's very similar to that. But in general, you could, if you were on a border, as long as you don't have another office on the other side, then you wouldn't have to change anything as your dental practice.
Okay. Are there payment for referrals in the dental industry? So if the primary care dentist refers me to a periodontist.
I'm not that one. I'm not actually sure. I know in the dental practice I worked in, we didn't do, I'm not sure if it was because it wasn't allowed or we simply didn't do it. We didn't do payments for referrals from other dentists. I think it was more just, you're kind of expected to reciprocate. If you get a referral from someone, then you're gonna refer back to them if you can.
Okay. And most of the deals that you're involved in, are they single practitioner or multi-practitioner, or how big are the practices?
Single practitioners are more common for us. We concentrate at Tavola, we try to concentrate on offering kind of the bigger business services to smaller businesses. What we found as a niche is that small businesses don't get as much of the bigger consulting services, the bigger services as big businesses do, because it's simply not available to them. So it's more going to be single practitioner for us in smaller practices.
And do you find that most of the single practitioners use an intermediary such as yourself, or is the situation more typically that a dentist in any given town knows the other dentists, and when he wants to sell his business, he sort of already knows who to turn to? They can go out to lunch and kind of iron out the
Right. I think we get a good mix of both. I would say that having a company like us help out in that transition, even if you know who you're going to sell it to, is important. One, the transition when you decide that you want to sell should start, 5-10 years before the actual exit. I think the mistake that a lot of practitioners make, and this goes for dentists and a lot of practitioners, lawyers, accountants, is that they don't do exit planning, like they don't do long-term exit planning. And especially in a service industry, you have patients that have a lot of trust in you as a dentist. And if you just sell to someone without much of a transition, you're going to lose that trust, and you're going to lose, the new owner is going to lose a lot of those patients or have trouble retaining them because they don't know them. So, I mean, the whole premise on dental is that you get trust with your patients and they stay, and you retain your clients that way. But if you lose that, they have no reason to continue. They may go look somewhere else. So, like, I think that using a practice like ours to help you not only prepare your financials, prepare your business, but also to help you in that transition. Maybe that transition ends up being, what I would recommend is a 3 to 5 year transition with a new dentist. Maybe if you're looking at retirement, you're going to go to a dental school and start talking to graduates, start talking to new dentists to buy out your practice in 3 to 5 years. That also gives you a lot of time to plan for the cash that may be coming in, and help them plan to actually purchase it, whether that's going to be a buyout over time or an SBA loan or something like that, or some combination. So, I mean, I think even in a small practice, it's important to do a lot of exit planning and a lot of strategy.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense that a lot of deals are done by, hiring young graduates from dental schools.
Yeah,
That's with them.
Exactly. And it's because everybody wins there too, right? It's that they're getting used to and seeing your patients, they're getting hands-on experience in your practice, and you're getting help kind of transitioning out of that work mode. So maybe you're working 60 hours a week and you can cut some of that time down and start preparing. Because there's the other thing. The practice needs to be able to run without you. So like any business that is being sold, you need to prepare the practice to be able to not have you anymore, whether that's reputation or very specific things that you do for the practice. You got to transition out of those things, or it's not going, the sale is not going to go well after the fact. The transition to the new owner is not going to go well.
So in cases of earnouts, do you see that the earnouts work for the seller? Is there accountability and access to the books that the seller has, 3 years after the deal? And, do the buyers of those businesses, do they really emit the payments they're supposed to make?
Yeah, that I think one, in the agreement, it's going to be written on what kind of access level you have to the books. There's going to be a reporting requirement similar to like a loan covenant, that you're going to be required to show a profit and loss statement every 3 months, every 6 months, depending on what your actual deal is. And I think it's not common for the new owner to not pay the fees, those payouts, especially if you did that transition, right? I think if you're just selling to a new person that you've never met before, you just recently met for the buy, then it would probably be more likely that they would not pay that fee maybe 3 years down the road, and you could miss out on money there. But I think with someone that you've worked with for 3 to 5 years and you've slowly transitioned everything over to, and you're friendly and on good terms, it's good. That's going to build that relationship too, to ensure that you get paid out the rest of what you're owed over time.
So I think you mentioned a term like slowly transition. Does that mean that when the more veteran dentist is selling his business to a younger dentist on an earnout, that the older dentist may, instead of working 5 days at work 4 days a week, and then 3 days, and then 2 days, and then 1 day a week, kind of phase out that way. So, maybe he has a lot of loyalty among some of his patients. And
Right, that's exactly what it is. And even after the sale, there's always opportunity to continue to work on a part-time or consulting basis. You want to keep that relationship good. First of all, the more work that the dentist, that the senior dentist does that's selling the practice after the fact, the better that the payout's going to be, right? If he can help that new dentist really do a good job of retaining all of his clients and continuing to make sure they're hitting those big thresholds, those revenue goals, then he's going to get his full payout as well. So it's kind of in everybody's best interest to have a longer transition and a more gradual one. I think it helps everybody. It helps the new dentist, it helps the older dentist, and it also helps all the patients. Again, we're talking about dental anxiety. I want to be very comfortable with someone that's putting their hands in my mouth.
do you typically recommend to your seller clients that they receive some capital upfront, even if the younger dentist has to take out an SBA loan? Or
I think it really depends on the situation. It would be nice that one, because of the huge differences between each seller's needs, right? So a seller may need instant cash right now. Maybe they're trying to fund something new for their retirement or doing something like that. Or they may be able to push it out. So I would like to see a down payment, some sort of a payment to the older dentist, more on good faith that they get something up front. And it also makes it so that the new dentist already has skin in the game, that they've put something forward and they have more motivation to work harder and make sure that they not only get that loan paid off, but they're ready to do the payouts for future years as well. So a lot of times it's going to be a combination of all of that. It's going to be some sort of down payment, some sort of payout. You also don't want to hit the new dentist with a huge loan that they're responsible for right off the bat too. You want that to be more gradual, because that's going to make it easier for them.
I guess part of the formula for figuring out what the exit price should be would be the investments already made in technology and the investments needed to be made in technology. So a lot of,
yeah, to an extent. So valuation is kind of As much of an art form, I think, as it is a science and math. Most valuations, though, are going to concentrate on the cash flow stream. Like for smaller practices, especially when you don't have good transaction data or you don't have good peer comparisons, that the size difference between a single practitioner dentist versus a very large group makes it hard to use those as comparables. You're going to concentrate on DCF models, the discounted cash flow model, and you're going to concentrate on really trying to value the cash flow stream that's going to come in the future.
Um,
So I'm sorry to expand on that. So technology, it may come into play. The discounted cash flow model is not going to directly take it into account. There's other things, other models that you could use that could use capital expenditures as part of the valuation as well, if there has been a large amount of technology or there needs to be a large amount of technology. That's going to be up to the buyer and seller as well. So if a seller has very outdated chairs, maybe they have chairs from 20 years ago, 25 years ago that aren't quite up to par and are going to need some repairs. Maybe that's something that goes into the buyout agreement, or that's something that goes into the price overall after the DCF model. So you could have a DCF model that comes back with a $2 million valuation. And then that's the starting point. That's actually something I wanted to touch on as well, is that the valuation is really what the fair market value is of the company at that moment in time in a perfect world. That's not necessarily what you're going to get for a sales price. That's why transaction data, when you use transaction data on other practice sales, is hard, because you don't know what the original valuation was. You just know what the sales price was. You still have to be able to find a buyer that's willing to pay that amount. Whether it's worth that or not doesn't always matter, depending on who you can find to buy it, or if they can afford it, or if the current revenue stream can even support a payout and a new salary and paying the old dentist. So that there's quite a bit that goes into that. I would call valuation kind of your first step in a negotiation. Think of it like a super valuable baseball card. You could have a Mickey Mantle rookie that's worth $50 million. It's not worth $50 million if you can't find someone that has that kind of cash that's willing to buy it, though.
So you do the valuations more on discounted cash flow, which looks forward. This is so our dentists understand. Discounted cash flow looks forward, projects what the cash flow is going to be, and that's discounted back to the present value using a cost of capital. You do it more that way, or do you put more emphasis on historical performance?
It's kind of on both. You're going to use historical performance to predict what you think is going to happen in the future, and then you're going to discount it back to present day and add all those periods up. So it is touchy. You want to make sure that you're grabbing correct data. You want to make sure that you have good data. And there's some adjustments that have to be made to the previous data to kind of account for that future value, future cash flow projections.
So as far as investments in technology, my understanding, one of my dentists told me that it is a big expense, because if they want to upgrade one room, they feel obligated to upgrade all the rooms with a new chair, new pieces of equipment. They think, if I visit them in January and I go to the new room, and then I go back in April and I go to an older room, I'm going to add, something's wrong, I'm getting less good treatment. So it seems like it's kind of the investment in technology kind of needs to be on a office scale, not a room scale.
I would agree with that, unless we're talking about, that you have a very specialized room that you're only going to upgrade that, but it's for the same service. So in your example, that because you went back for the same service, maybe it would be the exact same room. But I would completely agree with that, is that investments in technology are going to be a pretty large scale, depending on what size your practice, and those chairs aren't cheap.
Well, I would imagine that the equipment companies offer financing.
They do. So Henry Schein is the main dental provider in the United States, and they have their own financing company above and beyond. Equipment loans are usually a little bit more, a little bit easier to get than say even a new business loan. Equipment loans and financing and leasing are not hard to get, but it is still expensive. And you really have to measure if you're getting this new product, if it's going to allow you to either maintain your current level of service. So if it's a new technology that absolutely you absolutely have to have because every dentist has it, that's one thing. If it's a new technology that maybe isn't quite proven yet and it's still at the higher end of the price scale because it's brand new, you really have to think about what it's going to do to your practice. Is it going to increase revenue enough to pay for that lease? Is there time that you can maybe wait for that technology to kind of lower in price before you go out and buy it? So that one is a big deal that you really need to pay attention to what this specific technology is, if it's going to last and if it's worth it right now. Because like anything, technology, when it's brand new, is going to be much more expensive. Now, if you have chairs from 25 years ago, then it's probably going to increase the level that you can provide in your practice.
I would imagine the big companies like Shine, they would probably take back the older equipment or allow you to sell it back to them.
I think depending on the age of the equipment, there are deals that they'll buy it back, especially if you're leasing. So that's something else to consider too. If you're leasing, you have a buyout or a return at the end of the period. So if you did a 6-year lease, the opportunity is to get all new equipment and do a new lease and return all that other equipment, or decide that maybe this technology is still good, you still have some mileage left on it, and you do the buyout of the lease. It really depends on what type of lease you actually did.
Yeah, I don't know exactly how the leases work for the dental industry, but in other industries, you got to be really careful with those leases. Now, when you want to terminate it, you have to give notice in between certain windows, which are
Yes.
not always obvious. Sometimes there's restocking fees, shipping fees, all kind of ancillary fees that one needs to be aware of. All right, maybe moving into investments in marketing. So there's been litigations, maybe like a dentist gets divorced, and then there's litigation around the value of that practice and how much of the value was in goodwill. And the dentist says, all the goodwill is personal. It's me, because you see all these degrees I have on the wall. Everybody loves me and thinks I'm the best dentist in town. And then the adversary says, well, you're getting those patients not because of you, but because of all the marketing we're doing. So we have to remind people by fax, by email, by app, by telephone calls. We send them birthday cards, and we do all this kind of stuff to get people in the door. So the goodwill belongs to the office, not to you. So anyway, maybe you tell us what you think about marketing costs.
I mean, I do think that the goodwill does more belong to the practitioner than the advertising. I mean, you can do all the advertising in the world, and if you go into a dental practice and they're not good, or they mistreat you, or you're not comfortable with them, that none of that marketing is gonna matter anyway. I mean, think of, I won't mention names of practices, but there are cut rate practices that do a lot of business, but nobody actually wants to go there. They do because it's out of absolute necessity. They do it because they have no choice. So I mean, marketing in general, I think concentrating on more creative levels of marketing. Again, looking at this as you have to build trust, and it's not just someone's gonna see you on a PPC ad, on a pay-per-click ad on Google. That might be your first step. But I think most people, when they're looking for a dentist, are looking for something more than an ad on the internet, are looking for something more even than a television ad. They're looking for someone that they can kind of instantly bond with or instantly trust. One of the practices I was the CFO of did a lot of events during the year to kind of get their name out in the community. So one of my favorites was once a year, they did what we called the free dental clinic. And basically they covered it. If you came in and you didn't have insurance, they're going to cover any cleanings and simple fillings. So it wasn't like big services. It wasn't the more expensive or time consuming ones, but it was the simple stuff that maybe some families just can't afford, and they don't have a dentist that will take Medi-Cal, or they don't have a dentist that is willing to work with them on a payment plan or something like that. And the first year we did it, it was awesome. We had a line completely out the door and around the building. Everybody was super busy the entire day, and it built a lot of goodwill for the practice, for the practitioner, for the company. A news crew came down and covered it. I think that that type of marketing investment for events and being a little bit more creative, if it's possible, is probably more valuable than straight PPC. Not that those other types of advertising don't work. I think they definitely do, and I think they're necessary, but I think adding in something that's more creative is a good idea that could really jump up the value and the reputation of a dental practice.
Sometimes dental practices can go overboard with marketing. I went to a dentist and I think I had to watch a promotional video before they would start the procedure. And then on the ceiling, I had to look up, there was a poster of some other service that they were offering. So to me, it kind of turned me off. But
Yeah, well, and you don't want them, I think just like anything, I think we get uncomfortable when it seems like someone's trying to oversell us something, right? I think if you get me in the door and you do a good job, that's really all I need. If you get me in the door and you're constantly trying to upsell me, or you're constantly trying to show me how great you are, I want to be suspicious right off the bat. I don't have the same level of comfort if you just simply treated me nicely and did a good job. The current dentist that I go to, we chat, and they don't try to upsell me. They tell me what's going on with my teeth and give me advice, and that's it.
what about the labor situation? How easy or difficult is it for dental practices to attract and retain good staff, whether dental professionals or office managers?
Uh, this is another one where it's going to depend on your market. It's going to depend on your reputation. Kind of a creative idea to be able to get a good flow of new workers when you need them is one of the practices I worked for did a dental assistant school. So they started a school on the side that was accredited and offered the actual education. So not only were they opening up another cash stream, another revenue stream for themselves, but they were also ensuring themselves a good supply of good labor where they could train them in the ways that they want to. I think that's always a good idea if you have those kind of resources. And I think having a good partnership with local recruiters and dental associations would help bring in that kind of labor. Just like anything else, though, I think it's always hard to retain good talent. I think it's always hard to find it. I think it's always a risk to hire a new employee that you don't know. And I think just making sure that you're being diligent about who you hire and how you do your interview process can really help that, as well as compensation, as well as making sure you're at least at market and offering incentives to new employees. I think that goes with pretty much any position, right? Is making sure you're taking care of them like they're taking care of you.
Do you have any rules of thumb as far as what percent of revenue should be attributed to the help to the assistants and all the employees?
I mean, labor is going to be your biggest cost. It's going to be roughly 50%, if not more, of the cost. Then you're looking at your other normal expenses of doctor salaries and payments, and your office expenses and technology, and depending on what practice you're in, maybe it's orthodontic supplies are going to be pretty expensive, but you're probably looking at about at least 50% for labor.
And roughly how much should rent be?
That I mean, that's a harder one to pin down, because that really depends on your market. It's going to be a much larger percent. It may be as much as 30% in California versus maybe not that much in Wyoming or in some other state. Arizona specifically here is not as high as California, but definitely not as low of a cost of living as other places. So maybe you're looking at 20%.
Well, that doesn't leave a whole lot of margin for the dentist. If labor is at least 50% and rent maybe 20% in supplies and overhead, insurance, and
Yeah, I mean, off the top of my head, as far as revenue, I think there's still included in part of that salary expense is also the dentist salary, though.
oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
And is there any industry statistic as far as, the range or what the average dentist makes?
Dentists usually make anywhere between 100,000 and 400,000 a year. And it really depends on what type of specialist they are, what type of market, how much they work, how long they've been in the industry, and who their partners are. I mean, depending again, the dental practice that I worked for cleared in the couple million a year because they had 7 or 8 locations. You're going to see higher margins, for example, in specialists. So orthodontics is almost always going to be a higher margin than general dentistry.
Anything you want to say about the life insurance or extent of life insurance or business interruption insurance that dental practices have?
That I'm not real familiar with, unfortunately. The interruption insurance we never dealt with at the practices that I worked with.
All right. So, just as far as like back to the revenue streams, when people make co-payments, or don't have any insurance, are you vigilant about cash, actual cash, or is nobody using cash or to make co-payments, or is it too much?
Sorry, say that again. You kind of bounced out the audio.
Yeah, I was just asking about the cash that a practice might receive from co-payments or from people that pay privately. Do you focus on cash, or is that too insignificant to really worry about?
Probably too insignificant on actual. We're talking about actual paper cash, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It probably not real common. You're gonna take a credit card payment much more often than you're ever gonna take cash. I know we had some cash in our offices. People would come and put a down payment for ortho or some larger service in cash, but it was almost always insignificant in comparison.
Anything you want to say about a practice offering its own financing? Is there like a minimum size the practice should be to offer its own financing, or is that a can of worms that's difficult for the practice to administer? Or
so if you have a good office manager or you have good agents that like office workers, I think I don't think there's really a minimum size. You do have some options though. You can offer in-house financing. You can also offer care credit. Care credit is extremely common in most medical practice, specifically in dental. Not everybody can get approved, so that would be the challenge of that one. And you do have to pay sometimes a hefty fee to get that financing to you. But I don't think there's a lower end. I think like a small threshold for practices. I think it's more if you have the staff that is going to be diligent enough to make sure you're collecting those payments. I don't think it's a bad option though. I think in-house financing is going to be cheaper than sourcing it out to Care Credit or to some other financing type company. And I do think it's a good idea for smaller practices to offer some form of that, and maybe just pay attention to kind of the credit worthiness and you kind of gut feeling on if this person is going to pay, and pay attention to your historics, right? Pay attention to when you have done this before, what percentage of people paid to make sure you're staying on top of that.
so if I have a dental practice, a nice thriving dental practice, and I wanted to sell it, I wanted to hire you. Maybe just tell me a little bit about how you might qualify me, and my questions would you ask to make sure I'm a good client. What kind of fees would be involved? What kind of timelines would be involved? And what would be your expectations from me to help you in the process of selling my business?
I think the first thing would be to talk specifically about your general operations. We're going to talk about how many patients you have, what kind of data you track, what kind of systems you use, how many employees you might have, how long you've been around. And that's really going to tell me what kind of scope that we need to look at for that type of engagement. So if it's someone that has been in business for 25 years and maybe doesn't track the kind of data that we're going to want to do, the first step is going to be, let's get in there and let's start tracking this data for a few months to really see where you are. So I would look at specifics like the percentage of revenue that's coming from recurring versus one time. So we're looking at hygiene visits, we're looking at cleanings and versus say crowns. I would want to know that. So if you don't have that, that would be a first step. I would want to know your retention rate, how many patients come back for hygiene, how many patients, if it is recurring, how many patients come back once every 6 months or once every 3 months. I would want to know how many patients that you've converted. So they came in, going back to the cracked tooth example, they came in for a cracked tooth. Were you able to convert them and get them on a recurring revenue stream? I would go to your utilization of time. So something kind of interesting. I'm not sure if a lot of dental practices do this, but we experimented with it in the one that I was working at, is we did like a capacity study almost. So there were 6 chairs in the practice, and we wanted to see what percentage of time. It's something that lawyers do, right? Lawyers and accountants do it, where they're looking at how many hours they have available for work and what amount of hours of those ended up being billable. So in dentistry, that's something that you can do. That you could, we did a utilization study basically on those chairs to see how profitable each of the chairs are. What's cool about something like that is that you can also go into, okay, well, what if we expanded? If we added another chair, what's the space that we have in our current practice? Do we have a room that we could put another chair in? Do we have a room that we can put more equipment in that would instantly jump up the revenue in the company without having to move? What kind of utilization are we doing? Are we spending too much time on these certain procedures? What's the average amount of time it takes us to do these procedures? So there's a huge amount of data that, as a consultant, we would want to start collecting right off the bat, that most dental practices probably aren't keeping track of independently unless they've worked with someone before. So that would be my first evaluation, is I want to see what you're doing now, what your goals are, because that's what this is all about in the first place. If you're coming to me to sell the practice, you might have, there might be a goal that you want to sell the practice within 10 years. An engagement that is going to last 10 years is very different than one where they come in and say, I need to sell my practice in 6 months. Those are going to be extremely different engagements. They're going to be very different on the fees, and they're going to be very different on what we can do for you in a short time versus a long time.
And then so if I come to you today, how long does it take for us to get an agreement in place for you to represent me? And how long does it take to actually sell the business?
The agreement can be done within a week. I mean, we have templates that we use for our buy side or sell side agreements. They're not super complicated. These are pretty easy contracts to take a look at. Also depends on if you want to get it reviewed, but there's not a huge amount of negotiation that goes on between that part of it. And then as far as how long it's going to take to sell, I mean, if there's a willing buyer, especially if you've already got someone in mind, that could be something that happens, 6 months. You could have a 60-day closing period. So that's all going to depend too. It could take, now if you're in a small market where maybe there's not as many willing buyers, you're in a small city in Arizona somewhere, then it may take you, 10 months to sell a practice, which is also why that model that you go and find a dentist to hire and kind of do that transition is much more attractive than trying to just find a buyer like it's normal business. Dental practices automatically already have a limited market to sell to because you got to be a dentist. So that's it. I think it's key to really follow that model of finding someone to transition to, or start the process of exit planning and then find that person to transition to with your consultant.
So the actual buyer has to be a dentist. A lay businessman can't.
I mean, they could buy it and not be running it, but the dental license is going to be held by the dentist. So especially in a matter that they can't just come in and buy it unless they've already got people in mind to run the dental practice on the actual practice.
Right. And then, are there roll-ups going on now? I'm not sure if there's publicly traded dental practice companies. There were, years and years ago, there were. And then is private equity getting into?
Private equity gets into it and starts doing like multiple buys. They're going to be looking for larger practices to on the get-go. And I think if those aren't available, then there's always the chance that a broker can kind of go, and find a whole bunch of single dentists and then go to a managed group to be able to do that. Now, again, that one would be the issue would be that you would have to have the dental staff and the doctor in the practice already, and they'd have to stay, or you'd have to be able to bring in a new dentist, and it would just be a management group that comes in and does it. But I think roll-ups do happen, and it's larger companies that are looking to buy firms that they can even take national and franchise. The one I worked with, we actually talked about at some point doing a national expansion that involved a private equity group coming in and buying controlling interest, retaining his entire staff, like our staff at that point, and the doctor, and then doing a second buy to completely buy him out the rest of the way, maybe 5 years down the line after they'd opened up another 20, 30 locations nationwide.
Okay, almost the last question. When you're looking at the financials of a dental practice, maybe you can talk a little bit about the work you have to do to separate the personal expenses from the business expenses. I would imagine that it's kind of great because, if I have a membership at a country club, one could say, well, that's personal, but the dentist could say, well, I need that because that's how I meet my clients.
Right. And that's probably pretty common in any closely held company, is that people are going to have more what look like personal expenses, but that maybe aren't. What we do is we're going to interview you. We're going to have an extensive amount of conversations with the owner of the practice anyway, and we're going to kind of dig in and figure those out. When you do an evaluation, or when you do evaluation for any practice, or you start an engagement for consulting, you're going to dig into the financial statements and really get into the details of what everything is for. One, because you're looking for things that you could potentially cut or discount. Maybe there's some waste in those financial statements. So I think you're going to have a lot of conversations with that owner to come up with the things that you're going to cut out. Now, when you do an actual valuation, you do some normalization on the financial statements to get them in shape for kind of that transfer. So you would already pull out the owner's actual personal expenses. Maybe they're paying for a life insurance policy for themselves, or maybe they've leased a car for themselves and it's within the business. You're going to pull all of that out. You're going to pull their salary out because you might replace that with a more market friendly or fair market value of their services, or you're going to leave that for the new owner to decide, and you're showing them what they have overall in cash flow. So the expenses that are really personal, but they're actual business expenses, those are going to be discussed. Anything that's been commingled, I think some smaller business owners tend to overuse their checking accounts or overuse their business accounts and put personal expenses within their businesses. Those are going to all be cleared completely out, so they're not on the books anymore.
Is there anything you want to say about goodwill?
Are we talking about goodwill in the accounting sense, or are we talking about goodwill that a dentist builds just by reputation? Because those are going to be very different things.
Yeah, I think maybe more the accounting sense. So maybe some of the dentists, they're probably familiar with personal goodwill, their reputation, the community, things like that. But maybe the last question from you, what do dentists need to know about goodwill from an accounting perspective?
Okay, from a selling point, not much. From a selling point, goodwill is not going to matter to you all that much. From a buying point, if you're buying a practice, that's where it's going to depend. GAAP accounting requires you to recognize goodwill as an intangible asset. Now, luckily, most companies, most private companies, are not going to have to follow GAAP, and there's some exclusions specifically for goodwill that allow you to amortize the goodwill even when you're not, even when bigger practices can't. But for someone that's selling, there's nothing they really have to worry about. When you are buying tax-wise, you're allowed to amortize the goodwill over 15 years. It's tax deductible. And that's only, this will be the last distinction, I think, too. That also depends on the format of the sale, if it's a stock sale versus an asset sale. So that's something that's probably important for people to know when they're looking to sell their practice, is that there is a difference between a stock sale and an asset sale. A stock sale is the whole company. So think of it as all the liabilities, all the potential liabilities, all the assets of the company and their customer base. That would be a stock sale. An asset sale is literally just, it could be just the chairs and the equipment. It's the buyer is not saying that they're going to take on any potential liabilities, and they're only buying the assets. Asset sales are much more common in smaller practices than stock sales are. And also because in an asset sale, that goodwill is deductible on your tax return, and in a stock sale, it's not. So if I'm a buyer, even I'm more likely to want to do an asset sale.
It's deductible in the first year?
It's not deductible in the first year. You have to amortize it over a 15-year period either way, but it is deductible. In a stock sale, it's not.
Okay.
It's not amortized and it's not deductible.
Oh, wow. That is a big difference. Okay.
Right. And for that matter, if I'm a buyer, an asset sale is always going to be more attractive to me because I don't take on the potential liabilities that are not on the balance sheet, that could come up later, because I'm not buying the actual company. I'm just buying the pieces of the company.
Well, maybe the final thing, anything you want to tell us about Tavola Group in terms of the depth of your bench, the geographic representation you have of dental practices?
Sure. So one, we're a virtual firm, and we actually have employees all over the place. I'm currently in Arizona. We have people in Wyoming and Illinois and even Puerto Rico. And we also have some offshore type workers that we use for data entry purposes, not a lot. And we do a lot of different services. We do compliance work in taxes, so we do tax preparation. We also do advanced tax planning for higher net worth individuals. As far as our brokerage department, we concentrate on pretty much just all small businesses, not necessarily specific to dental. We're more concentrating on the size and are willing to jump into pretty much any type of business.
Okay, great. Well, James Kelly, thank you so much for speaking to us. It was a long discussion, and we covered a lot about the dental industry. So thank you so much for educating us. We really appreciate it.
No problem at all. Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.